Welcome everybody to today's talk. I've been sitting here on this very nice sofa. Looks like I'm in a Chekhov play or something like that, which is very dramatic. Sadly I can't act, so we'll just have to get on with me doing a talk. The subject today is Tim Burton's America. And I don't just mean the America he portrays, I also kind of mean the America that is made him, the America that is invented him. It's a two-way thing. Tim Burton is American. You can't ever escape that, so I think he occasionally tries. Here we have a picture from Edward Scissorhands. I think you know it's a familiar version of suburbia, but if you notice closely, there's a house. I think the idea is it's being sort of disinfected a bit of insects, there's some kind of clearance going on, but of course he does it with a stripy curtain, so it looks like a circus. So that is Tim Burton for you, normality made weird. Okay, I should introduce me, for those who don't know. I can't believe there's anyone left who doesn't know who I am by now. My name is Ian Nathan. I spent many years in a magazine called Empire, which is a film magazine from Britain. I saw the coming of email, I saw the coming of the internet, DVD became streaming, so I saw many different changes. But throughout my time, Tim Burton was always vitally important to the magazine and important to me. I think the first film I saw, I was asked this the other day, by Tim Burton, was Batman. I actually saw that at the cinema in 1989. Anyone who's old enough to remember, there was a whole crazy marketing campaign. It was giving me a great sense of something epic happening. But I think it was more to do with Batman than Tim Burton at that point. If I was to mark out a film where I knew kind of what Tim Burton's all about, I think it was Edward Scissorhands. I think most people would agree with that. So many years later, many grey hairs later, I've written a book about Tim Burton, trying to do what I've been doing this whole time here in this lovely town, to encapsulate how the films represent what goes on in his imagination. As I've said in virtually every introduction, I'm not sure you can ever get there. I'm not sure you can answer that question. I'm not sure Tim Burton can answer that question. But let's give it a go. Let's enjoy the journey of finding out about Tim Burton, and particularly in the case of today's talk, about his relationship with his own country. Okay, this is a little montage to get you in the mood. Okay. I love that montage because obviously it gives you a feel of how connected Tim Burton's films all are. You know every one of them. You can see how visually, thematically, story-wise, they all kind of connect. In watching that montage, did you ever think about America? Did you think, oh, this is a portrayal of America I'm watching before me? You probably didn't, and I would initially agree with you, but I think it is. I think Tim Burton is one of the great film chroniclers of his homeland. You know, I put him alongside figures that are more obviously maybe American portrayers. John Ford and his great westerns, David Lynch and his weird version of Los Angeles noir, the Coen brothers, Steven Spielberg, and he's a director of suburbia, just like Tim Burton is. Paul Thomas Anderson, to name a more modern director, has spent his time charting different versions of America. And I do put Tim Burton alongside them. I think he's a key figure in this respect. I think, and again, he would never admit to this because he hates analysing himself, but I think one of his key subjects is America. I mean, you sort of stretch that argument. I think Hollywood is, you know, its main subject is portraying itself, is portraying America. And he is part of that inclination to look at itself, look at where it came from. And in this, I think it's about creating a mythology for America. You know, America's really young. It's just over 200 years old. I mean, obviously, I do reflect also that there was a Native American kind of history before that, and I think Tim Burton does a bit of that as well. So there is an ancient culture beneath. But if we're talking about what we see as modern America, it is very young. And it doesn't have what Europe has. sort of history, a mythology, a folklore. So it's had to invent one for itself. And that was mainly done through movies. Movies gave us westerns, gave us musicals, gave us horror movies. And in that sense, they built a mythology for America. And I really do think Burton's at the heart of that. He is the Brothers Grimm, the Hans Christian Andersen. He is the fairy tale maker of America, charting its strangeness, its coming of age, its sexual awakening, its freaks and geeks, but something very strongly identifiable as American. You think of Edward Scissorhands, it's a fairy tale about a Frankenstein figure who didn't fit in, who tries to fit in with what we think of as America, and finds it's a weirder place than where he came from. You think of Sleepy Hollow, which is a fable, a horror story, kind of comic, forensic science story, but really it's set in a world that shows you the birth of America, civilization trying to carve itself out of the wild. I think Tim Burton's very in tune with what you might think of as the wildness still within the landscape of America. Dumbo, however good or bad you may think it is, it's a wonderful story of Depression era America, of these travelling circuses crisscrossing this massive country and showing you the sense that entertainment and progress comes possibly through the idea of storytelling, of enjoyment, of escaping the daily into something more. It really is attuned to that. And I add to this the idea of Disney. Every time, when I spoke before and most of the introductions, I've always brought up Disney. And Burton has a sort of very odd relationship. He's kind of the dark son of Disney. He was employed there very early on as an animator, didn't fit in, was kind of exiled from the kingdom, thought he was exiled from Hollywood, yet he would come back and make Nightmare Before Christmas and Ed Wood and Dumbo and many other films and make them millions of dollars. He has this weird, sort of conflicted relationship with Disney. Yet I also think there's something of Walt Disney in him. Walt Disney wanted to open up the idea of legend and storytelling to American audiences. He wanted to explore dark things. I mean, you watch those early animated films, and they are traumatic. I was once asked by some interviewer, and he said, "What do you think is the most scary film ever made?" And I said, hands down, without a doubt, Bambi. Anybody who's watched Bambi knows it's absolutely traumatic. It's a traumatic experience. And I think Tim Burton would agree. He loves those animated films. And I think he's greatly influenced by them. So as much as he is the rebel son of Disney, he is also very much Walt's godson in that sense. He's taking on the mantle of revealing America to itself, telling stories to America, showing you that being American, living in America, is a traumatic experience. And this is the opposite point in a sense. There's also the countercultural drive, the countercultural blood within Tim Burton. As an early teen, he was very much an outsider. He didn't fit in. He didn't have many friends, although he does tend to mythologize his youth a bit. But beyond that, when he was around about 18, he lived in Burbank. If anyone knows the layout of Los Angeles, there's a great mountain range between what's the valley, the San Gabriel, San Fernando Valley, and Hollywood. West Hollywood, you probably know by picture. And he crossed over those mountains. It's not that hard, actually. You can get a cab to do it. And he found this incredible punk scene going on in Hollywood, this countercultural scene. In fact, that's where he met Danny Elfman. And he found Halloween Town. He'd gone from this boring suburbia where he lived with his parents and his older brother. It really didn't fit in. He found this wonderful underworld where people could be what they wanted, could dress how they wanted, could behave as they wanted. He found them very welcoming, and I think that fired his creativity. And I think that also is important to him. America is not just Burbank. America is not just Walt Disney. It's not just kind of what the movies have told us. It's something else as well. And I look at figures such as Bob Dylan, or Jack Kerouac, Andy Warhol. And And I think Burton is alongside those. He reflects that sense of being at once countercultural, going against trends, making new ones, being at the forefront of culture and sort of chipping away at tradition. And at the same time, hugely popular, really catching a nerve with what you do. None of those figures would ever go, I am this thing, I just want to write my music, I want to do my paintings, is all they would say. And Burton has that. He has that sense of always being himself. But in doing that, he seems to speak to millions of people. You know, you look at films just to sort of embody that as mainstream, or as supposedly mainstream, as Batman Returns or Mars Attacks. And you just think they're made by a rebel. They're made by someone who's going against the grain, who's going against what Hollywood would want. Batman Returns, which I think is a wonderful film, it's playing at the festival. There's one more screening, isn't there? So if you've got time, if you haven't seen it, want to see it again, please do. It was a really important film for the studio Warner Brothers. It was the sequel to this very successful version of Batman. It was really the second film was really the attempt to sort of build this superhero genre. You know, the first one marked the territory. The second one proved it could keep going. So there's a lot of pressure put on it. But Burton's one demand, and they said, please make a note. He didn't want to. Please make a note. His one demand was, I get carte blanche. It was quite a demand, to be honest. Yeah, I get carte blanche over everything in this film. How we tell the story, how it looks, how it feels. It's got to be my Gotham this time. We'll talk about this a bit more. But Batman Returns is a punk rock film. It's a countercultural film. It's wonderful for it. But the critics came for him, the studio came for him afterwards and said, we don't want any more of that. And the reason he didn't make a third Batman was simply because the studio said it's too dark. He actually go on to make many more dark films that were hugely popular. So there's always this kind of friction within him. He works in Hollywood, but he's not of Hollywood exactly. Let's look quickly at a variety of approaches. You know, we watched that montage, and we could tell they were all films made by Tim Burton. They all had that thing in them. Anyone who came to my first talk, the thing I call Burtonesque. I elaborately broke it down into many facets. That's true of all his films, but also they're incredibly different. The genres are different, or what seems to be the genres. The approaches are different. The actual geography is different. You know, there are films set, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, set in Hollywood, and there are films that Edward Scissorhands, which is kind of a weird version of a Florida suburb. There's a film such as Sleepy Hollow, which is New England. He doesn't stay in the same place. He moves around geographically, visually, stylistically, and in terms of the kind of tone and telling of his stories. He's not just one thing. He is a widely various film. I mean, it was said of the great Howard Hawks that he made a masterpiece in every genre. I think you can argue that for Tim Burton. They just look very like Tim Burton films at the same time. Yeah, but he also, something he's saying, fits into something more traditional. I think, and we'll delve into this a bit more, but I think he kind of fits into something classical as well. There is in America a Gothic tradition. There is something he was harkening back to. You know, he didn't sort of self-invent Gothic. You know, he looked right back to Nathaniel Hawthorne and Edgar Allan Poe, and you know, he looked at sort of H.P. Lovecraft. He was building on a tradition and keeping that going. And it comes back to that sense of mythology, building mythology for a country. He was part of that club too, the weirdo writers he really fitted in with. But that is mixed with this indelible kitsch. He has an obsession, fascination with kitsch. I mean, most obviously, anybody who saw Big Eyes will know it's a kind of, it's a poem to a great kitsch painter, Margaret Keane. And I think anyone who looks at those paintings, you might not think of them as high art, those kind of weird children with huge eyes. And Tim Burton called them Village of the Damned Children. But he was genuine in making that film. He genuinely loved her work, and he genuinely loved who she was as an artist. He's not being ironic when he absorbs kitsch. I think that rather like Andy Warhol, he thinks it's important, he thinks it's an art form. And every single one of his films is invested with a kitsch. that's very crucial to who he is. And it's an American kitsch. It's a very kind of distinctive force. Mars Attacks is broadly kitschy, and the whole film's got a kitsch tone. It's based on trading bubblegum cards that he collected as youth. He loves that kind of patina of brightly coloured baubles and items you find in shops. You know, he's such a contradictory force. He constantly attacks consumerism as one of his themes, and conformism. He loves buying stuff and having stuff and collecting stuff, and he loves that rather kiddie, geeky feeling of just having things on your wall, posters, comic books, records. You know, that sense of deep American kitsch, and you can see it and feel it in all his films. Even something as sort of period piece as Sleepy Hollow is full of kitsch. There's something kitsch about Johnny Depp's character, Ichabod Crane. You know, he's silly. He's not straightforwardly heroic. No character, maybe with the exception of Sweeney Todd, but even he's a bit kitschy in his own way. You know, passes through one of Tim Burton's films. No character he's ever created is free of American kitsch. And I think that's just how he wants it to be. Just, I won't come to a full conclusion, but all of this does, you know, give us the question of, what does Tim Burton think about America? How does he feel about America? Now, any question you ask of Tim Burton, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, and he would certainly not give you an answer. But as this talk progresses, I think you'll get a sense that it's twofold. That on one hand, he is sceptical, even disdainful about America, and especially American culture. He's very anti-conformism. He's very anti the kind of set life that is proposed to children who grow up in America. On the other hand, he's deeply affectionate and loves the fact that this country allows you to be who you are. There's a freedom of expression. There is something very open about what America gives to you. He could never have been Tim Burton if he was born anywhere else. He needed to be in America, and America did invent him. But they are contradictory forces, and they are always in his work, that he both loves America and is very sceptical about America. Okay, we have another clip here. Do you want to hit the lights? Thanks. Right, there are 4 films there. Did everybody catch them all? Can anybody tell me which 4 films we saw there? Right, there's no marks being taken. But, right, what we got was Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, Big Fish. Next one, everyone knows the third one, don't they? Edward Scissorhands. And the last one was Big Eyes. And obviously what connected all those 4 clips together, why I put them in a small montage, was they're all suburbia. And they're all very similar looks of suburbia. I love the clip of Edward Scissorhands. You know, we talk about filmmaking, and everyone think about filmmaking in terms of spectacle and special effects and, you know, what movies might bring to us. For me, great images are just detail, specific, brilliant detail, and just the envy's following that path up to the door. I don't know what it says, it's just weirdly beautiful. It's a kind of sense of being guided through suburbia by something, and she's an Avon lady. You know, these are the kind of things I think that make him so distinctive. It's the tiny detail. But let's talk a little bit about suburbia. I want to basically put this in the context of how does Tim Burton portray America? How does he make it look in his films? What is his vision of America? And the one we all know best is that he does this weird thing with suburbia. He makes it look odd. He grew up in Burbank, as I said. He grew up in a middle-class suburban. Los Angeles is a very weird-looking city, so that the idea of suburbia doesn't quite fit Los Angeles because it's too big. You can't quite get to the edge of it. It goes on forever. But essentially, where he lived in Burbank was kind of what we consider to be a suburbia. And the look of those bungalow-like houses was the childhood home he had. And this is a middle class. This isn't sort of a story of working class trial over adversity. This story is growing up in a very normal house, a normal education, surrounded by normal kids. And that, to Tim Burton, is hell. So he rebelled. He went deeper into himself. I mean, I told this story before. He tells a story about how his parents bricked up his window when he was a teenager, a young teenager. You know, basically no more light into his room, and so it's like something out of a Gothic story by Edgar Allan Poe. The truth is, they were just fitting an air conditioning unit into his bedroom. But Tim Burton likes to tell a story, he likes to mythologize. I think he has this kind of exaggerated version of his childhood that fits his persona. But we're going to be Freudian about it. Why did he need an exaggerated version of his childhood to begin with? He certainly didn't fit in. And I think he certainly had these incredible creative urges from the very beginning that needed an outlet that would come. But his views of suburbia across these different films is often a place to escape from, or a place that turns on you. You think of Edward Scissorhands, and to begin with, it's very inviting for Edward. The family welcome him in. He tries to become part of this community, but they will ultimately turn on him because he doesn't conform. The idea that Tim Burton gives us is identical houses in all these films, yet something's going wrong with them. There is something ill about suburbia, something, pestilence, maybe too strong a word, but certainly a sickliness. You think of those pastel colours. Why does he portray suburbia that way? Well, it's the fairy tale mode of the storytelling, but also shows you something more. But at the same time, it's something like Frankenweenie, where this picture comes from. You know, what Frankenweenie shows us is a much more affectionate version of suburbia, where children grow up with kind of great freedom and you can cherish childhood. He has these different currents constantly. You can't call him one thing, you can't define him by one thing. But certainly, suburbia is very important to him visually and in storytelling terms. Certainly, I say Hollywood. I don't mean this in the kind of satirical, he makes films about filmmaking, and we'll talk about that in a second. You know, as a thematic thing, I think it's very much in landscape terms. He has used Hollywood as a backdrop. You think about Pee-wee's Big Adventure, that is set in and around the studios. That is the Burbank of his youth. You think of Ed Wood, that is a film set in this rather seamy black and white Hollywood. He uses it as a place. He constantly echoes the idea of Hollywood. You think of Sweeney Todd, and that entire London is designed to look fake. It's designed to remind you of the 1930s filmmaking backplots of the studios, like Universal. It sort of reminds you that Hollywood landscape is also studios, and they're full of fake things. So there's sort of this weird layering that goes on. Hollywood is a backdrop made of backdrops. It's a kind of weird sort of mirrors within mirrors kind of depiction. Americana, this kind of draws us back a little bit to the idea of kitsch in his works. What I describe Americana, and there might be sort of literary professors amongst the audience who can argue differently, but I would describe it as the hyper-real version that America treasures of itself, a kind of folklore visualization America does for itself. Diners, old cars, you know, the Greece of the 1950s, that kind of sense of a cherished, self-invented history. You know, it's mythology again, but this is done in a slightly more charming, exaggerated sense, and it's something that Burton is very much in tune with. You think of the paintings of Big Eyes, you think of Big Fish with its kind of enchanted storytelling mode. You think Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is sort of set in a real estate advert for New England Americana. It's America, but exaggerated. And of course, Burton is an exaggerator. That's kind of how he operates, is how he paints his pictures. So he also absorbs this idea of Americana. Rural America, you know, as much as he does cities and suburbs, his films venture out into a rural version of America. You know, we think of Big Fish especially as a film that journeys through an almost kind of fairy tale version of the wilds of America. Dumbo is a film that is set in a Disney-like version of what Depression-era America was like outside of the cities. Mars Attacks actually spreads its kind of evil limbs right out into rural America. He's very interested and the alternative sides of what you might call a patchwork nation. Very distinctive thing, but obviously he's done Gotham twice, and this is a very particular version of America. It's America as a nightmare. It's a kind of nightmare vision of New York. Basically, Gotham is a twisted variation of New York, and he hones in on that concept. It's kind of very interesting that the only, although he attempted to make Superman a later point, the only superhero he really was in tune with was Batman. And I think it's a lot to do with the backdrop of Batman, this idea of American nightmare in which these weird, insane, crazy figures can kind of rise up. That was his idea of superheroes, and it's so contrary to maybe our modern concept of superheroes. So Gotham, I think, is very important to him. It's very important to our idea of Tim Burton, how he portrays America. You know, when you think of Gotham City, you know, my mind goes straight away to the kind of two versions he did of it. And I think that's also maybe a view he has of, you know, the cityscape of America, that it's an oppressive place, that, you know, it's industrial and dark, it's Kafkaesque, it's basically kind of escape from. I think that's also very true of his American landscapes. Okay, I've got another clip here. You hit the lights, thank you. That was Pee-wee's Big Adventure. For those who haven't seen it, it's Tim Burton's very first film. Very silly film, actually really good fun. Entertainment, and what I mean by entertainment is how Tim Burton fed off an enormous amount of things as a youth, stored them up in his mighty imagination, and has sort of used them as colours in his palette for all the films he makes. He loves the idea of entertainment as a sort of method of communication. Entertainment is something that's very much part of the American lifestyle and very much part of how he grew up. It's important to know that as a child, you know, he had a very geeky, I wouldn't say normal, but a very geeky childhood in which he watched horror movies on TV. He watched avidly all those kind of kitschy American TV series like Time Tunnel, Planet of the Apes. He read books, he read comic books. He was very in tune with the kind of the 60s and 70s American culture, kind of junk culture that he fed upon. And all of that was stored up in his mighty brain, ready to be used. It's a constant sort of recourse within his work. He was an avid fan of a magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland. I don't know if anyone knows it, but it was one of the great original film magazines that just depicted genre films, monsters, you know, weird creations, horror stories. And there are other directors also. It's an interesting, the Famous Monsters of Filmland is almost a kind of route to a certain kind of filmmaker. Peter Jackson is an avid fan of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Guillermo del Toro loves, you know, Famous Monsters of Filmland. I think you can kind of group those three, although they come from different countries, as a kind of creature-obsessed, stylistic, genre-crossing filmmakers. So what I'm sort of really trying to say is these great ingredients of American culture were absorbed by the young Tim Burton, ready to be used as he kind of came to make his films. So the first subject is film itself. There's something very self-reflexive about the work of Tim Burton, that he makes films about filmmaking. He does. You know, every film, to a certain extent, is about filmmaking, but there are very literal evocations of this. Ed Wood is about a director. It's about the worst director who ever lived, not according to Tim Burton. But it's about the process of filmmaking and the creative trials that come with filmmaking. I think it's very true what Tim Burton wants to evoke in that film is that this is what it's like. This is what I go through. This is my world. There's also films like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Frankenweenie. There are constant references across his work to other films, literally in terms of Edward Scissorhands and Frankenweenie to Frankenstein. And he very much is referencing the kind of the 1930s Universal version of Frankenstein with that. They are compendiums of other films. He is that kind of quota of films. Nightmare Before Christmas, in many senses, is about a guy trying to put a show on, trying to put a film together, trying a new genre, getting out of his formula, and trying something new, and falling into kind of peril because of that. A think there's something about the great dilemma Burton maybe faces is that I must stick to my path, otherwise it will never be watched or never appreciated. Circuses are very important. I tried to figure out kind of where they came from, but I don't have any evidence that he attended many circuses as a child. I think he just likes that idea of circuses as part of American culture as freak shows. The 1930s of Dumbo that we see, is a sense of these travelling parades, these travelling circuses being full of strangeness and oddity. Yet that was the entertainment. And I think Burton could conceive of each of his films as a circus, arriving in town, packed to the gills with weirdos and oddballs, from Siamese twins to kind of strong men and giants. He loves that idea. He loves that idea of circuses as communities of oddballs. And as we know, all his films have that sort of sensibility. Big Fish is very much about a circus. It's about a young man who runs away and joins the circus. And I think Burton, when he escaped his suburban childhood, it must have been a sense of running away and joining the circus. It was a very close circus because they lived in Burbank. But that was a sense of where has he gone? He's gone off to join this kind of crazy world of filmmaking. So circuses are very important to him. Comic books, well, we could have mentioned this already, but Batman is such a kind of interesting kind of case study in terms of Tim Burton as a director. At the time, let me go back a little bit earlier. In 1978, Tim Burton attended Comic-Con. If you don't know what Comic-Con is, it's this huge convention in San Diego in which all the kind of genre films the studios are going to make were kind of preview to audiences. 1978 is much smaller. But he went just as a kind of guest. He wasn't special at that point. He wasn't yet a filmmaker. And he went along and he saw a presentation for Richard Donner's Superman film. It was about to come out. And a kind of Warner Brothers marketing executive got up in front of these young men, they were mainly young men at that point, and started describing the film that was going to come out in a few months' time. And he got to a point, and someone shouted out, he basically said, there's a scene where Superman will get to the edge of the top of a building, and will transform into Superman and fly. And this guy stood up, or shouted out from the back, Superman would never do that. He would never transform on the edge of a building. If you refer back. And this poor marketing executive was kind of taken aback. He had no answer to that. And they turned on him. The room started booing this marketing executive. And Tim Burton observed this. What he observed was the passion that those people had for the material and their dedication to it. And he knew when he came to make Batman in 1989 that was waiting for him. So he was very conscious. I mean, he's very conscious of his audience. He's always been that way. But he was very attuned to the idea that he stepped into the superhero world, the world filled with peril, certainly for the director. But he did it, and he did a fascinating thing, I think, with Batman. Although it was his third film, he was still a young man. He was given the job to do by the producers when he hadn't even made Beetlejuice yet. He was just preparing Beetlejuice, and they came to see him and showed him some visuals. And I think at that time they were looking for very much a new director to do Batman. They wanted a new voice. And that's certainly what they got. It was described beautifully, I think, and I think this could describe much of Tim Burton as junk culture filtered through an art school sensibility. I think if you want a good definition of what Burton's work is like, that's it. The junk culture of comic book Batman given an art school sensibility. It's got this metropolis-themed brutality to it, the original Batman. It's quite a fierce film. Burton called it a jewel of freaks. I can't imagine him in Warner Brothers meetings pitching this to the executives. It's a jewel of freaks in this kind of monolithic Gotham. But somehow he got to make that film. And he got to cast Michael Keaton. Got the rage that met the casting of Michael Keaton. And people were burning things outside Warner Brothers studios. I mean, Michael Keaton was the second choice. Tim Burton had originally wanted to cast Bill Murray as Batman. That was his first choice. So take a moment to imagine what Tim Burton's Bill Murray as Batman, concept might have been like. Like, you kind of like it in a weird way, but we will never know because they went with Michael Keaton. But what I ultimately love about the first Batman is it harks back to that idea of Gotham and America. That actually what he was doing was showing you kind of this kind of urban hellscape. He was showing you America as a very dark place. Opposite to what studios thought was summer films. Summer films was Indiana Jones. Summer films was Superman soaring into the air. No, not for Tim Burton. Yet, it was the biggest film of that year. It was just a huge thing. And he was invited back, as I said, to make Batman Returns, which is even more Tim Burton-like. Gotham now has become the German expressionist fairy tale realm that still reflects the kind of weirdness of America. That it has a lovely sort of, you look closely at Batman Returns, it really resembles New York, only under cover of night, cover of snow. All the designs, it has that Art Deco wonder of New York. So I think it's something even more attuned with America in Batman Returns. There's even more freaks in it. So, when I say Tim Burton's America, it's a weird place. We'll go quickly through these. Musical, as we can see. Musical is such an... I think Martin Scorsese said there are only two genres that are truly American. That's the Western and the musical. You might argue that there is a sort of folk tradition of musical that fed into it, but let's not go down that road. Burton loves musicals. I think he loves musicals because they're quite strange concepts. The idea that there's a reality where everybody suddenly breaks into song is conceptually very weird, but he adopted that far back with Beetlejuice. He has a whole musical number in that film, which is splendid, and of course he'd go on to make Sweeney Todd and Nightmare Before Christmas, both of which are essentially musicals, and essentially musicals in a Broadway tradition. So he's doing America again, he's doing a version of America and channeling the musical. Television. Dark Shadows, if you know that film, is based on a television show that he watched when he was a kid. The reason he wanted to make Planet of the Apes, you can argue whether it really was successful, is because he loved the TV version of Planet of the Apes as a kid. He grew up with television. Television is part of how he is. So it is naturally channeled into his portrayal of America. But Disney, again, is the abiding sort of albatross on his shoulder. He's part of Disney's history. Disney is part of his history. And if we can think of a concept of Disney, it is so present in his work constantly. This is Dumbo here. And it's a parody of Disneyland. He built his own Disneyland. It's actually in a studio north of London, an old aircraft hangar. And he built an entire dreamland. It's an amazing set. The film may not be as successful as we wanted it to be, but the idea of this set was just fabulous, that he could build his own theme park. His own slightly twisted, perverted version of the happiest place on earth, which apparently is Disneyland. Okay, so another... Okay, that was Sleepy Hollow, I'm sure you all know. There's a great danger in showing clips at a talk like this. It's because you just want to watch the rest of the film, basically. Sit down and just play it and far more pleasure. But I wanted to allude to something I've talked about so far quite a lot, is that American Gothic is a very important thing in terms of Burton's work. But most importantly, I think, is just in terms of how he belongs to this great tradition of American Gothic. It's not something he is inspired by or uses, he's part of it. He is part of that tradition. These are, in American terms, classical myths which he is continuing. The work of Lovecraft, the work of Edgar Allan Poe, the work of Nathaniel Hawthorne, Washington Irving, who wrote Sleepy Hollow. He's in that tradition, he's part of that tradition, he's continuing. His canvas might be film, but very much that's what he's doing. And if you read many of those books, you might say they were quite Burton-esque if you go back to them. Different ways, but they are quite funny and odd, and they have an American feel to them that's very different from the traditions of sort of Gothic horror in the UK and in Europe. I think the distinctive style of American Gothic that Burton is part of. I don't know if anybody's watched Wednesday, the television series in which he's played a large part, directed quite a lot of it. It's been hugely successful. It's just a marvellous indication of how he keeps reaching new generations with his style. But Wednesday essentially is Tim Burton doing Charles Addams' Family. And the Addams Family is equally part of classical American Gothic. It's this idea of American normality, a family unit, twisted into wonderfully absurd senses. And I think Wednesday is a great evocation of a rebel, going against the traditions of school, this kind of old-fashioned school. It's like Dead Poets Society in a very weird way in which there are dead poets around. It's a great sense of how Burton continues this line, this lineage of the American Gothic. And before we showed Sleepy Hollow, the 2 times we showed it at the festival, I've asked the simple question of, have you come to watch a horror movie or have you come to watch a musical? And everyone seems very amused by this because they knew exactly what I was talking about, because it's neither one nor the other. It's absolutely both at the same time. And although this doesn't work very well with my maths, it's 100% a horror movie and 100% a musical. So it's 200%. Okay, and 21 notes. What I kind of mean to say here is that as much as I've talked about his zaniness, his humour, his affection, his fairy tale, and all those lovely elements that are part and parcel of Burtonesque, they are still horror movies. They are still dark. They are still creepy in their own way. And what I love is that you're never quite sure at times how to absorb it. That if you watch Nightmare Before Christmas, of course it's playful and it's stop motion and it's a Christmas film, but the depiction of Halloween Town is really icky and it's really odd and it's really repellent at times. As I say, Sweeney Todd, the character played by Johnny Depp, he's incredibly dark. He's incredible. He's a killer, and he's depicted that way. There is genuine horror in Tim Burton's work. I'd be really interested to know, sit down on that sofa, and I would go, have you ever wanted to, or do you still want to, take out all the jokes, take out all the kitsch, take out all the zaniness, all the stuff that kind of come with who you are, and make a horror movie straight, try and scare people? I don't know how he would respond. I don't think he would know how to respond. I think he would like the challenge. I think he would want to step up to it. But he doesn't quite make horror movies. And there's something very American in how he approaches horror. He takes the kind of very universal style, he takes the classical traditions, and he makes it entertaining. It's that old kind of the Hollywood thing of, yes, let's make scary movies, but let's make them for the whole family. And there's a kind of pleasant sort of sense of, yes, he makes horror movies, but you're all invited. Comic book Gothic we've kind of talked about, but the only superhero, as I said, that Burton ever wanted to make was Batman, because he was a creature of the night. He was kind of like a vampire. He was although he had no superpowers, he was kind of a lonely figure. He lived in this creepy mansion on the hill. And how could that not inspire Tim Burton? He did later try and make Superman. I do wonder what his Superman film with Nicolas Cage might have been like, and I think it may still have contained quite a lot of Gothic. Just to be slightly highfalutin for a second, I also think there's something Jungian going on in Tim Burton. I've said the whole way along at the festival that somehow he makes these very weird films about weird outsider figures, isolating people, all the people that kind of fit the bill of these things. Yet they touch everyone. Everyone kind of relates to it. Wednesday has been a sensational success because it's invited in a whole new generation of viewers who are far too young to see Edward Scissorhands at the cinema, or even Alice in Wonderland at the cinema. He keeps speaking to people, and I think he is in tune with something Jungian, something this collective sense of mythology, the kind of invisible stuff that connects us all together. That human beings all have written into our genes certain ideas about outsiders and heroes and quests. And they're all there in Burton's work. He is attuned to those things. If you watch Big Fish, you look closely, on Albert Finney's nightstand, it's a copy of Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, which is that great examination of universal myths, a book that inspired Star Wars and Mad Max and numerous other great mythical films. And in his own way, I think Burton does that. Nightmare Before Christmas is a quest film. It's an odyssey in its own way. So he is part of something bigger. He is part of this weird tapestry of Jungian things that ties us all together. I think that's one of the reasons we relate to him so much. Okay, it's another clip. Okay, that's Big Eyes, I'm sure you all know. That's a lovely little shot. Like, it's kind of someone pitching their film to a studio going on there. It's Tim Burton sitting there. I want to make it with this kind of weird guy, and you know, scissors for hands, and studio head sort of like, what? So there's that. Yeah, coming back to that self-reflexive thing. There are always kind of films about him and what goes on with him. And real life is part of the Tim Burton style. It's part of his canon. It's part of how he explores America. It's the real America he gets to grips with. He just sort of turns it into something fantastical. You know, there are the two films that are about real people. Eda Wooda and Margaret Keane in Big Eyes. And what's so beautiful about these two films is they are eccentric people. They are people rather like him. They are artists. But they're also kind of passionate, optimistic, very warm people. I think those two films sort of combine give you a very good picture of the third subject here, which is Timothy Burton. All his films are about him. You know, again, he would cringe at the idea if I sat him down and said, you know, tell me about how you are Margaret Keane, tell me about how you are Ed Wood, tell me about how you are Catwoman. And he would sort of cringe, oh, please stop, because he hates talking about himself. But no one working at the level he is working, I think, is quite as autobiographical as Tim Burton. No one in the studio system makes films quite like him. That's so close to his own persona. So I think, when I say real life, I think one of his major subjects is Tim Burton. Tim Burton makes films about Tim Burton. Tim Burton is American. He had an American childhood. Whether he tries to escape from it or not, he's part of Hollywood, and he's part of what we think of as America, this great, strange patchwork nation. So real life is really important. Now, I did a podcast the other day while I was here, and the very intelligent young men gave me some really hard questions to answer. I thought it would just be, what's your favourite one? And, you know, who's your favourite star? But no, it was really quite intense. And I was asked, in what ways is Tim Burton a political director? Does he have an agenda politically? I got taken aback by that. I thought, I had to sort of stop and think. And the best answer I think I came up with is yes, but no. And what I mean is that he's not explicitly political. He doesn't make films in the sense of the 1970s films that sort of got to grips with a paranoid nation which was crushed by the corruption of Nixon and Vietnam and all those elements at the end of the 60s. You know, filmmaking very much channeled a political agenda through the 1970s. But there are films Burton would have seen. Yeah, his films are paranoid. We'll talk about this in a moment. They are hysterical in the sense that they explore hysteria. There is something implicitly political. The disdain films like Mars Attacks has for authority. The president is a goof, played by Jack Nicholson in that film. He's completely at odds with the situation. He cannot save America. There's a great anti-authoritarian streak that runs through all his work. He's kind of anti-something. And what I like about Tim Burton in that sense is he only nudges it. He doesn't sort of crack you over the head with a political idea. He suggests things, he implants, he incepts the idea of something about America that is unsettling. Conformity is dangerous. I think he presents that all the time in his work. I come back to Wednesday, and I wonder about Wednesday. Wednesday's really interesting, and as one of the chief creative forces, I think we can put this to Burton as part of what he wanted to do with it, is that she's a very angry young woman. you know, rebelling against an adult system. And I think Wednesday says something quite powerful about modern youth, American youth maybe, but universally, how a younger generation is very angry. And I think that's represented in Wednesday, that she's just not having it. She's kind of wants to change the world around her in her own way. So I think he is a tuning fork for those kind of things, the elemental sense of the political. But I don't think he's an overtly political director. He doesn't make films about presidents after Mars attacks. He doesn't make films that directly comment on America. The continuation of the podcast question was, what do you think he makes of Trump? I don't know. I can't speak for Tim Burton. I can't imagine he would be overly, you know, enamoured with Trump, because Trump represents a kind of perverse form of conformity, and Burton is very much against conformity, against self-expression. He's wholly for individuals being who they are. So, and I think that, if you want anything from his films, it's political. He says, be who you are. You know, however weird you might be, however odd you might feel, that's all right, because America is all about being who they are. Forget this idea of suburbia and everybody mowing their lawn at the same time. It's good to be different. Okay, I've got another clip. Okay. That was, of course, the end of Edward Scissorhands, nearly the end of Edward Scissorhands. And I think this is more than any maybe other points that I've made so far. It's true of what Tim Burton does, is he explores the American psyche. I think he is trying to figure out how the American mind works. And of course, you know, it's a multi-various thing. It's full of different forms, but he's fascinated by this concept of the American psyche. And leading on from the point I just made about politics, his films are really rooted in ideas of paranoia and hysteria, that they come from the conformist, they come from the other side, they come from suburbia. What's happening in that clip is the rejection of Ed Wood. Yeah, I mean, plot-wise, it's because he's accidentally cut the young son of the family, but I think the real point that's being made here is because he does not fit in. He's something different. And that feels very modern to me. That feels very much like a message that keeps being relevant. You know, the rejection of the other. It obviously comes from Frankenstein, but it's used in a very distinctive way. And throughout his films, there's this constant paranoia amongst what we might think as normal people against the otherness. And it causes hysteria. Mars Attacks is this kind of symphony of hysteria when the kind of Martians come to invade and start zapping everybody with laser beams. There's something fascinatingly useless about America in that film, that hysteria takes over. And I think he knows that to be true. It's this hysterical place. It always reacts with this kind of aversion. And I think he's a little bit appalled by that. But there is the opposite. As I say, always in his work, there is this kind of push and pull of things. That he isn't just one thing. He isn't just the disdain, the discomfort for America. He also loves the place he grew up in. And I think that's shown so much in the different communities that come together. That Halloween Town, in the end, is the place where Jack Skellington belongs. The Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, the very title tells you there is a home for peculiar children where they can all be weird together. And I think there is something about America in this that actually, he looks at it and there's always a place. It might come back to that time where he found the counterculture in Los Angeles and found somewhere to belong. You know, Dumbo, you know, the ideal place is the original circus, where they're happy, they are a family together. Ed Wood is just about a family of weirdos who come together to make these wonderful, terrible films. And I suppose that there is a reflection of Burton's ideal movie set in that he wants it to be this community where he belongs. I think there's been struggles with that through the years, but he loves that idea. I think that's one of the reasons why he loves filmmaking, is that it's a community exercise. You know, although he's the auteur and the leader, the togetherness is also present in his work. Yeah. As I said all the way along, he portrays a patchwork nation. There's so much difference in his films. Florida, to New England, to the LA of Pee-weeho, and the kind of weirdness of Beetlejuice. His films are spread across the nation of America, and he's shown you that, rather like the kind of characters he makes in stop-motion films, it's kind of sewn together of different bits and pieces to make something. America itself is an odd creation, that Tim Burton might have made up. It's one of these wonky illustrations turned into a country. While I was doing the podcast and we were talking about monsters, I stopped and thought about, is there such a thing in the world of Burton as an American monster? How does he portray American monsters? And I realised when I tried to answer that question is all the monsters are human. All the ones you kind of add up to turn out to be the humans, and all the monsters, or such as they are the heroes, or they're the people we show affection, or Big Fish, which we'll talk about in a bit of detail just in a moment, is filled with the idea of all the weird creatures that he encounters, all the giants and witches, and the Siamese twins, all the oddballs that he comes to know are the people that make him and save him. And it comes back to that togetherness. Tim Burton, if he has American monsters at all in his films, it's not the Martians. They're groovy and fun and silly. It's the humans in his films. And often it's the normal humans in his films over the monsters. So ultimately, what he does is celebrate American weird. And he shows us, I think, that American weird is a lot more widespread than maybe America claims it is. There's a lot more American weird going on. Okay, here's another clip. I need to hold on a second. PowerPoint doing something weird. Let's click on that. Very quickly, that's a lovely shot. That New Yorkness of Batman Returns. It's wonderful there. And as I mentioned, genius is in the details, and the framing of that kind of weird Rockefeller Center and the two clippers of the penguin is just fantastic visual storytelling. But it occurred to me that there is nothing more American than the concept of the Christmas movie. It's such an American kind of idealization. It's the season where the family comes together, and it's a wholesome thing we all do every year as we watch Christmas movies. And Burton is kind of like created his own weird version of American Christmas movies. Most of them are kind of Halloween-based, but also Christmas-based. So we think of obviously Nightmare Before Christmas. It's really interesting, that film, which he made with Disney, gets re-released every year in America. It makes many more millions of dollars for the studios. Yet they always release it somewhere around about Halloween and let it play on into Christmas. So is The Nightmare Before Christmas, put this to you, is it a Christmas film or is it a Halloween film? Well, that's Tim Burton for you. It's both. Batman Returns, I said this the other night, to me is a Christmas movie. You just sort of click from it. There's a giant Christmas tree in the middle of it. So it's certainly a Christmas movie. Die Hard is a Christmas movie, and Batman Returns is a Christmas movie. And all I'm trying to say really is that Burton has joined in this concept. He's embraced it in his own weird way. They're not quite normal Christmas movies like Home Alone or Muppets Christmas Carol, but he very much adheres to this. And I think he does it genuinely. Again, I don't think he's being ironic in this sense. I think he loves Christmas, but I think he loves the weirdness of Christmas as much as the comfy family traditions. Okay, last clip. I want you to finish by just giving you maybe 2 case studies in the idea of Tim Burton's America. 2 marvellous films that are very, very different and show you how, firstly, just how much variety there is in the Burton style, much range. One is based on a real director, as we've said. One is fascinating. I think Big Fish is quite an important film in terms of his work. It's a film about the idea of storytelling. It's almost self-exploration. But they also share quite a lot. They are films, if I was to say what Burton's view of America is, they're not stories about the American dream, as often mentioned. These are films about the American dream. I would classify them as films about the American delusion, about the American capacity to make up things and delude themselves, but also get on through life through that. Ed Wood is a deluded individual, but he's also a joyous, optimistic, brilliant individual. He thinks, Ed Wood, that he is making films as good as Orson Welles. He cannot see how bad his films are. And I think there's something that Burton finds deeply heroic about that he can still thrive. And it's a film about identity. Obviously, it's got a complex subplot about a man who finds himself in dressing up in female clothing. It's a film about his marriage. It's a film about this lovely friendship he develops with the weary Bela Lugosi, played by Martin Landau, who becomes a sort of surrogate father to him. And they're both films, actually, about fatherhood in important ways. So it's very interesting that he does different things, but you can see the similarities in these two films. One is shot in black and white, the other in a kind of lush, naturalistic colour. But they're both fables in their own way, and they're both explorations of America. Now, Big Fish, I think, as I was saying, is a very important film. It's the completion of a trilogy of Ed Woods. So you get Edward Scissorhands, you get Ed Wood, and the character at the centre of Big Fish, if you don't know, is called Edward Bloom, Ed Bloom. The Bloom is named after the character from Ulysses, and that's the reason. And it's a film about a father who tells incredibly tall stories to his son. And the father is now dying, played by Albert Finney. And the son, Billy Cruddock's character, has come because what he wants from his father is the truth. What he wants is the father to stop telling these ridiculous, exaggerated, indeed Burtonesque stories about his life. What he wants, finally, is for his father to explain his life to him. And it's a beautiful journey that they kind of go on, because you get both sides. You get both versions of reality. So the film is functioning as a kind of sense of how does storytelling work? Why do we tell stories? What is the process? And it's really about Tim Burton. It's about how Tim Burton takes the reality of America, which we see in the film, and turns it into the fable of America. So yes, yeah, you do get ultimately both sides of the story. That the father's sense of the giant he met was just a tall man in the end. He wasn't a giant. That the Danny DeVito character wasn't really a werewolf at all. He was just a wild man. That the truth is different from the reality in a sense. But what I think Big Fish and to an extent Ed Wood are getting at is that there is factual truth, there is reality, and there is emotional truth. And the father's tall tales are emotionally true. They're who he is, they're how he expresses himself. They're about his relationship with his son. And the understanding that the son comes to is that the tall tales are the more important ones. The tall tales say more about his father than the prosaic reality. That's what's so beautiful about Big Fish, is that it kind of portrays the idea of how Tim Burton portrays America. It's sort of how he takes this lovely landscape. And it's one of his most naturalistic films. If you watch it, it's all shot in Alabama. Burton described production as a travelling circus across Alabama. And sort of land and shoot these wonderful places. And interesting, in terms of the production, they shot all the, what you might call real parts of the story first, and then shot all the exaggerated parts second. Because he wanted to know and understand what they were and how they were exaggerating, how the tall story worked in terms of the overall arc of the piece. So I think Big Fish and Ed Wood are two wonderful examples of American delusion as emotional truth. That through all these different ways in which Burton describes America, how he frames America, how he does a kind of funhouse mirror version of America, what he is revealing is an emotional truth about the country I don't think you get anywhere else. I don't think you get it with Spielberg or John Ford or even David Lynch. You get different things with them. I think you get something quite profound and beautiful and honest with Tim Burton. He tells you, endlessly that an optimistic sense of there is good in the country as much as there is bad, and there is weird as much as there is conformity. And we should think of it in a much greater way. We should think of it as a place that has its own fairy tales. And he is going to tell them. Thank you. I overran my last talk, and no one could ask me anything. I do have a copy of my book here. I only have one. It's a rather old version. But the person who asked me the most unusual question, I will sign this copy and give it to them. Don't feel pressured. Don't feel like if you've got a your question you feel is perfectly kind of what you want to ask, please ask it. But yeah, if someone has a kind of testing question or an interesting question, then I will sign this book and give it to them. So it doesn't have to go back in my language. Okay.
You talk about Tim Burton kind of documenting the American experience, but obviously he's heavily influenced by the UK as well. So how does that fit into it?
That's very true. Obviously, he's something of an exile now from America. I think he moved about 20 years ago. I'm not sure the exact dates. Moved to the UK, and he's made films such as Alice in Wonderland and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which are based on very English source material. Well, that's part Norwegian, but let's not go down all that road. But Lewis Carroll, very English. Obviously, for the purposes of my talk, I sort of lent it to the American side of his career, but I think, he is adopting a kind of British, or tuning himself into a British sensibility as a sort of continuation of the classical myths of America. I think he sort of said, well, okay, where did these come from? And he sort of stepped back into England, and all the wonderful illustrators of Alice in Wonderland is heavily influenced by all those. And he's an eternal outsider. It's how he sees it. So I think he also loves this idea of exile. That actually, he's still an American filmmaker, but he's now an exile in the UK. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think he has got a whole British side to him that he's developed. But at heart, still will always fall back on, he is an American, ultimately, and that American sensibility. I mean, we look at Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Alice in Wonderland, and there's something quite American about them as well, in a Burton way. They've got a kind of kitschiness to them in how he does those stories. So, again, he can't really escape himself. But I think you're absolutely right. I think there is definitely a Britishness that has emerged in the second half of the career. And obviously you're from Britain, aren't you?
Yes.
Any other questions? I'm thinking, don't look at me. Please don't look at me. Any points anybody wants to make? Oh, yes! You've got to get some momentum with these things. 1, 2 down, everyone gets into it.
I wanted to ask you, because when you did the introduction to Svého, you said that it's kind of obvious that it's set in England, but in the studios.
Yeah.
But can you tell this because you're this much interested in Tim Burton's work? Or can you tell this because you're English yourself and you can see the difference?
I don't know if I can answer exactly that question. It's a very good, interesting question. I think the point with Sweeney Todd is that the film is set in London. It's set in the 19th century London, and that's the kind of the backdrop of the story. But also it begins as a Broadway show, and a Broadway show is about scenery, and it's about a faked version of reality, which is very obvious, but that is the theatrical tradition. Plus, Tim Burton sort of wanted to create in Sweeney Todd a sort of self-awareness where you perceive the landscape, or the urban landscape of the film, as something that's not quite real, that it looks like it was made for a movie. And I think what he's sort of alluding to is both the Broadway origins of the show, that it is theatrical, and also a sense of traditions of horror. So I think it's sort of thematic. And if you missed that, if you didn't see that, then that's perfectly all right. In some senses, it should be a subconscious thing you're absorbing. He doesn't want to interrupt the story. You sit there going, well, it's rather like, Universal's Dracula from 1931. The sets of Universal's Dracula from 1931. I think it's more a mood thing. Now, did I notice that from studying Tim Burton, or did I notice it when I first saw Sweeney Todd? I'll be honest, I got that from studying Tim Burton, sort of researched his intentions, his interviews, and he speaks about what he was looking for visually. And that's kind of true, right? Because he doesn't set his films in inverted commas reality. He sets them in a heightened sort of Tim Burton version of reality, which has all sorts of degrees. So there's the extreme end, which is Sweeney Todd, and films that are very obviously on sets, and then films like Big Fish and Ed Wood at the other end that are filmed in slightly more, but not wholly naturalistic environments. So it's a spectrum of things, but I think it's thematic. I think it's just an idea he has visually about sort of reminding the audience about the origins of things, but I don't think it's designed to sort of interrupt the flow of the story. But to answer half of your question is that I don't think it was my Englishness particularly that led me to that. It's more, this is how, my career, a wonderful career it is, has been sort of constantly analysing films and sort of breaking them down and trying to figure out how and why things are like they are in the mind of the creator. I mean, I can't watch a film these days. I will never get this back without sitting there and writing about it in my head, no matter what it is. I sit there and I'm like, oh yeah, sunrises here, they clearly mean something, dawning or something. It's just a way you get into thinking. But it's been a wonderful pleasure for me to analyse films in this way, so I can't complain.
Dobrý den, já teda česky. Prosím. Děkuji za hezkou přednášku a chtěl jsem se zeptat takovou asi jednodušší otázku, možná složitou. Jaký je váš nejoblíbenější film, jestli to jde říct, od Tima Burtona, a když jste dělal rozhovor s Timem Burtonem, jestli on má nějaký svůj srdcový film?
Okay, for those who don't speak Czech, I'm sure you do, it was a question about what is my personal favourite Tim Burton film and what do I think Tim Burton's favourite personal film of his own is. To answer that, I'm not very good at favourites. I get asked a lot, dinner parties and things like that I attend. Not that many, to be honest with you. But when I do get invited to a dinner party, sometimes you'll say something, oh, I know this is obvious, but what is your favourite film? And I don't have an answer to that. It's rather like music to me. I have films that fit moods, and I have a whole sort of, I grew up on films, and I have films that remind me of things. There are films I return to a lot. I was out to a re-release at a cinema a few weeks ago in London. They played a trailer of Lawrence of Arabia, and I was just like, that is the best film ever made. Just a trailer. And of course, it's not, but it felt like it when you watched the trailer. I wrote a book about Spielberg about 2 years ago, and I sat down to write, just dutifully with my notebook and put the films on. I put E.T. on. In 10 minutes, I was bawling my eyes out, and couldn't resist it. I just couldn't. I thought, oh, such a clever academic, bawling my eyes out. Did still make some notes, but through my tears. So I find favourites very hard, is my point. If I had to, if you pressed me to do it, I would say it's a draw, I'm kind of cheating, between Sleepy Hollow, which is probably my favourite, but I think Edward Scissorhands is probably his best. Because I think it's the most complete in terms of how and why and what, and everything we've talked about. The America, the Burtonesque, the style, the dreaminess, the autobiography. I think if you had to show someone said, I don't know what Burton's means, he said, well, okay, I'm going to show you Edward Scissorhands, and that's probably all you need. In terms of him, again, he calls them his mutated children. All his films are his mutant children, and he cherishes them all. And if you press him, I think a lot of directors are like this. They tend to hone in on ones that failed, at the box office at least. So he hones in on Ed Wood, which I think has made the least amount of money. He hones in on Big Eyes, which didn't really find its audience. And he wants to protect the ones that maybe are more mutant than the others, but he loves them all. And like all directors and creators, the next one is the one they're most obsessed with. It's the process that matters. Once a film's done, it's what belongs to you, not to them anymore. And I think he's about to make the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. It's a B movie, and he's remaking it with Margot Robbie, which is so Tim Burton, you know, to take a big A-list star, put her in a B movie remake, you know, involving a giant woman. And I'm sure there's going to be a political element to that if we look closely. That's what he's going to do next. And if we had him here, he would go, that's the one that means the most to me, because I'm in the process of doing it. So, yeah, I don't know. He might say Edward Scissorhands if you forced him to. He might say Nightmare Before Christmas, because you know, Henry Selick kind of made it with him. Yeah, he might be, it depends on the day you ask him. But again, he would hate it. He hates the attention being drawn on him. Any other questions?
You mentioned it before, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Does it annoy you as much as it annoys me? The first one is considered better by many.
I know, yeah. And I probably, because, you know, I grew up and I watched the original Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka and Chocolate Factory, as it's called, which is a more enchanting version of Roald Dahl. I do think that Burton's version, which is really creepy, if you watch it, is closer to Roald Dahl,
yes.
who's actually a really creepy writer. So I get that. Actually, I should probably put it in, it's one of the more British films. You kind of watch that film and you can take it as a horror film. That kind of covert horrorness does ooze to the surface in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So I think if you watch it with kind of like that thought in your head, it's actually, this is kind of a creepy horror film.
I think that was Dalo's intention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he, you know, about sort of murdering children in exotic ways. And it's a delightful film, you know, it's a wonderful adventure. But I do take your point. There's something, yeah, it portrays his dad as a dentist, and there's something shrill about it and like drill about it that kind of gets into you. But yeah, it's one I haven't watched for a while, and maybe I should return to it and just see. I always find the returning shows you a lot, but yeah, it's not one of my favourites, I'll be honest. One question there about the back.
Does Tim Burton wear sometimes woman clothes? For example, for preparation for Ed Wood films, or like this?
That's again a very good question. I don't know if he ever wore women's clothes to prepare for Ed Wood. What is certainly true is that I went on set of Dumbo and saw him at work with Dumbo, and he looked just like Jack Skellington. He had pinstriped suit and he had a walking cane that he was to stroll about with. He could walk perfectly well, you know, didn't need it, but he would gesture with it. And although he didn't have a megaphone like Ed Wood, he had a PA system in which he talked to this giant set with. But you could see him straight away. You knew where Tim Burton was, even though it was a huge set, he was there. Because his hair was up here, you know, sticking up on end. It's a fantastic suit, and he has this kind of body language, which is written into his characters. Depp channels it beautifully. It's in the stop motion. He looks like he's doing stop motion when you see him. You know, especially if you interview him. It's all this. I don't know. You know, you're like, take them, that's not good. You know, he say something. He's got better over the years, you know. When he was young, he's couldn't bear it. But he's sort of warmed up a bit, or wiser as an older man. So I don't know whether he's ever worn women's clothes. I imagine he's probably tried. You know, he loves kind of eccentric things. Yeah, channeling things. I'm sure he's kind of interested in that. But he's certainly an eccentric. You know, no, I mean I mean that in a complimentary way. I don't mean that pejoratively. He dresses with sensibility. He wears himself as a set of clothes. There's a question back. Yeah.
I suppose this question is more to you.
Okay.
Why Tim Burton? What drew you in? Why are you so fascinated by him that you have dedicated so much of your career to study him?
It's kind of, it was a slow process, I think, for my relationship with Tim Burton. The other directors, if I look back, you know, who were probably to do with timing as well. I look back, you know, when I wrote about Spielberg, I could see my childhood. You know, I got to those films, you know, Close Encounters and Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was writing about my childhood. That's what it was. He was there for me. Burton comes later, and you know, I was an awkward teen. believe it or not. I'm not the charming, confident individual you see now. I was a wretched, awkward teen who hated myself and didn't feel I fitted in everywhere. I tried desperately to be a cool goth. My mum continuously tells me I didn't do it very well. Because I used to wear very professional, I used to wear a purple scarf around my belt that I imagined blew in the wind as I walked. And my stepfather would go, window cleaning again, are we? But I imagined I was kind of rather like a pirate. So, to cut to the story, I related. I began to relate. And I think it's kind of what we all kind of get drawn to him. Because you couldn't say, I like science fiction films, therefore I like Tim Burton. I do like science fiction films. But I can't say that's what I see in Tim Burton per se. It's not actually what I see in Tim Burton, although he's done science fiction stuff. I love genre. I love storytelling in genre terms. And I love the way he uses that. But I think ultimately what drew me in, and it came with Edward Scissorhands and Batman Returns, those two films in particular, was this kind of sense of both the wonder of storytelling in genre terms. Something very personal that communicated to me quite deeply, and it communicates to a lot of people, and it still does. There's our friend who dresses beautifully as the characters, and I know he absolutely adores Tim Burton, because probably more than the films, it's about relating to these characters. And I sort of come back to this idea that he's creating a mythology that's for America and part of America, but it's quite universal. So I think of him, and I said this at the end of my first talk on him, I don't think he's a movie director. I think he's an artist who happens to use movies as his medium, as his canvas. But ultimately, I think he's an artist. I think his impulses are very deep-rooted, and as I say, he can't escape himself. He has to draw every film he makes before he one camera rolls. He has to take it through his imagination and onto a page before he understands it. And I think that's incredible. And I mean, he says his films articulate something he can't articulate by words. And if anything sums up what the movie medium can do, it's that. It's storytelling with images. And I become fascinated with that, as a way of interpreting what it might mean, and he offers so much in those terms. So as I've sort of gone on to write, and I draw back to him because he's such a rich kind of treasure trove of possibility in terms of analysis and all these different things. And I do add that this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. You could come up with a million other things about his America, about his style, about him, and they would all be very true. And that's a wonderful resource as a writer. And I wasn't a very good goth.
Yes, back to the America. How would you describe how it looks, the mental landscape of Tim Burton's America, with like 3 words?
3 words. I can use 2. I'd say Gotham City. I think, but as I sort of said, it's not one version of America, it's lots of Americas, it shows you. I would use the word underworld, but I wouldn't use it in the terms of a kind of dark and forbidding, hellish place. I would say underworld in that it's the alternative place to be. It's the other America. It's not the conformist, suburban, 50s television ideal of the family unit, everybody pretty and perfect and having their perfect lawns outside their houses. It's the other America that's quite thrilling, where you can express yourself, where you can be who you want. But the idea of freedom of speech means you can say crazy things and be different from other people, not, that you say what you're meant to say. And that's, I think, his America. I think he portrays it in different ways. Batman Returns I come back to, because the Gotham City of Batman Returns is a nightmare place that I want to go to. It's both fearful and strange and full of weirdos and all sorts of terrible things happening. But I would love to visit it. I would love to hang out there. It's rather like Blade Runner. I look at Blade Runner and it's kind of dystopia, and I think, but I really want to go there. It's so beautiful, it's so imaginative that I would love to be there. So I think that's where I think you find Tim Burton's America. Question? Yeah, and then question.
So I want to ask, I noticed the thing you said about that you see Tim Burton more an artist than director. And I have a question about Batman movie.
Okay.
So he directed the movie, he set the mood, and he also produced the next George Schumacher movie, and it is like a totally different movie with the tone, with basically everything, and all the die-hard Batman fans don't review it very well. So my question is, what is like that producer profession?
Yeah. How does he work as a producer?
Yeah.
In terms of what happened with those later Batman films?
Yeah.
Did he not have an influence on them? I think what you have to bear in mind with Batman, especially, is the presence of the studio. You know, it's a studio that belongs to Warner Brothers. It's their property. It's highly lucrative. Makes a lot of money for them. So they are very commercially orientated. And after Batman Returns, they worried it had gone too dark and too horrific and too weird to make the same amount of money they made in the original. Although if you watch that film, it's pretty dark and weird and horrific. So what they're expecting, I don't know. But I think it's part of the deal. In the end, economics drive Hollywood. It's part of the deal with Burton's relationship with Batman was that he could make sequels, and they had to cut a deal with him to kind of push him out, where he retained the credit, retained some degree of control. But I think it's a nominal, it's a credit. I don't think he had a huge amount of influence on those two sequels, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Joel Schumacher made those films in a kind of 60s, kitschy, exaggerated style, which is a version of comic book, but as you say, the fans didn't like it. It was too exaggerated. It didn't have the sort of the personal control that Burton brought to it, the kind of real richness of his interpretation. I think he did meet with Schumacher. I met Schumacher a few times. He was a lovely man. I know the Batman films aren't great, but he was a lovely man. And he did meet with Burton. Certainly on Batman Forever, they had discussions. But in a sense, Schumacher sort of took it outside his Gotham. He reinvented Gotham. And I don't see them as four films that are necessarily sequels. They're kind of reboots and reinventions each time. And that's what the studio wanted. So I think Burton just sort of stepped away a bit and went and got on with whatever he was making. Yeah, he's an artist, I was saying. I don't think he thrives particularly well as a producer. I don't think he wants to be. He's very, being an artist, you're also very controlling about the image and how it must be incredibly difficult to produce someone else's vision and not to be quite what you want it to be. So I think he probably stepped quite far away from those films, but had his name contractually still on them. But I think by Batman and Robin, he had nothing to do with Batman and Robin. Is there one more question?
This should be the last question.
Okay, last question.
So, while exploring the Tim Burton's filmography, have you ever felt like being pulled into one of his own universe? If so, which scene or set made you feel like you understand him? And
absolutely, totally. Like you do feel like you're going down a rabbit hole. The term, like Alice in Wonderland. You do feel you're getting sucked into it. And one of the problems is that there's so much in them that you start to go a little mad. You start to go, just in doing these talks, there's so many things I was listening, and I thought, I can't keep talking, everyone's going to get really bored, bored than they are already. So yeah, absolutely, there's a kind of madness. But as I was saying, I love Batman Returns, and I sort of hung out there quite a while in terms of doing the book and researching this. I watched 4 films again. I watched Batman Returns, Edward Scissorhands, Sleepy Hollow, and Nightmare Before Christmas. And maybe that tells you something about the 4 films that I'm most attracted to. I didn't consciously make that decision. I thought these are the ones that would remind me of what I needed to think about. But it's interesting. They are the ones I naturally lent into. So perhaps that is the worlds I want to go into. But yeah, as I was saying, they're both very inviting and off-putting at the same time. What would it be really like to hang out in the suburbia of Edward Scissorhands? I don't know. It's not exactly a nice place. So yeah, absolutely. Most of all, because of the way I kind of operate now, and the way I think, I'd love to go on those sets. I've been on Tim Burton sets. I'd go on Batman Returns sets. That would be the place I'd love to go. Just to go and see that world being created, see Burton in the middle of it. Still a young man controlling that incredible setting. I'd love to see the processes of them creating those worlds and putting them together. Rick Heinrichs, the production designer. I see all his sketches and building Gotham, that kind of thing. I find endlessly thrilling, this kind of creation of artificial worlds. I hate CGI in a sense because sets are extraordinary places. They're just wonderful because they are expressions of imagination built in 3 dimensions. It's such a depressing thing to go and see a green screen. And Burton has used them, he's done a lot of CGI work, and his arguments, I totally get it. But I'm all for sets, so I'd love to visit Batman Returns or Edward Scissorhands. Okay, thank you, everybody. I think we've got to draw a line there. I will. The lady there who asked the question, first of all, I'll give my book to, I'll sign it for you. Yes. But thank you, everybody else. I hope you have a few more Burton films to come. Even more to Burton, you've probably seen enough already. Enjoy the rest of the day.